We started a series last Sunday called SAILS Up, preparing for a move of God, which I believe all across this nation, all across the world, God's moving. Like he's never really stopped doing that, right? It's just whether we've got our sails up or not. And the wind is blowing, and I'm excited about what he is going to do. I'm excited about communities kicking off this week. This is how we do groups around here. Oh, man, I knew this would happen. I don't know whose waters these are. I think this is mine. Lauren, you don't have cooties, do you? You don't have one up there. Well, who knows whose germs these are? I'm not scared. Okay. Community's kicking off this week. If you've not signed up for a community, if you don't get involved in communities, I'm just going to say, this is not all there is to church, right? Where real church happens is in communities, in homes. There's a home near you for you to get plugged into this fall. And you can do that by going to thedwellingchurch.org and just scroll down, and there's a button that says Find a Community. And there's going to be a Berwick community. Come on, Berwick, where we at? Pooler, Southside, Georgetown, Richmond Hill. Who am I leaving out? Islands, downtown. Come on. All right, downtown and Islands. So there's a home near you somewhere for you to get plugged into, so sign up today. Wednesday night, this Wednesday, 7 p.m. is prayer night. Make sure you come out to the warehouse prayer night. I just felt this, and I haven't even talked to Alex about this because y'all about to have a baby and all that kind of stuff. You hope. I'm just going to say this. This Wednesday night, we're going after healing. I think that's what we're supposed to do. And so if you know somebody needs healing, if you need healing, come Wednesday night. We're not only going to pray for people, but I'm going to do a little bit of equipping. I feel like that's what the Lord would have us to do this Wednesday night, if that's okay with you. Probably, I don't know. All right. So Rush Sunday, Matt talked about it before service started today. Are you serving here? R-U-S-H? Oh, that's smart, right? That's clever. Signing up next Sunday to serve. There's tons of opportunities. People ask me sometimes that are new here. They're like, looks like y'all got it going on. Like, I don't know what to do. No, there's a lot of places for you to get plugged in, okay? There's always a place for you to serve here. There are places that we haven't even created yet that God's gifted you with to serve. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So serve Rush Sunday next week. October 9th, the Moore Conference. If you've not registered for that, it's free. What's holding you up? I mean, you know what I'm saying? So we're going after equipping for praying for the sick. That's the sole purpose of this. Because the gift of healing was not just given to a certain number of people that wear suits and ties and stand up on a platform and knock people out. You know what I'm talking about? It's about the body of Christ being equipped to display the love of the Father to a city, and that's what we're going to do. And so Moore Conference is happening October 9th, and then we have Wes Pickering coming to lead that, and he's also going to be in the service on Sunday morning, and that's going to be amazing. Okay, so October 9th and 10th. So let's jump in this morning. Sails Up. I had a conversation with somebody this week, and they were just saying, I'm just going to be real honest with you. They weren't being ugly. They were just being honest. They said, I just don't like the word revival. It carries like a baggage on it. So somebody can I get a witness on that one? Like especially when you hear an Alabama boy say it, revival. It's kind of got some religious baggage on it, and you think like, I don't know, you may think all kind of stuff. I don't know what you think when you hear that word. But here's what I want us to do. I want you to just kind of take that baggage and just set it down. And I want us to get back to the meaning of the word, a reviving, a refreshing, a fresh wind blowing in your life, a return to first love for Jesus, a wholehearted devotion to Him again, and all other things fade away. That's revival. That's spiritual awakening, and it happens first in His people. We talked about last week, Revelation, the church of Laodicea. They had left their what? First love. They left their first love. In other words, things had taken the place of Jesus in their hearts and their affections. And Jesus is like, hey, come back. That's all revival is just a returning. And so his wind is blowing. To have ourselves up means that last week we talked about confessing all known sin, right? We talked about swabbing the deck, not only cleaning the surface, but sealing the cracks in our life that where sin can sneak in and spoil what God is doing so that we miss what he's doing in our lives. And so today I want to go on this one, forsaking anything doubtful. These are 4 points. I'm just going to say them. Confess all known sin, forsake anything doubtful, obey the Spirit immediately, confess Christ publicly. This was a 4-point message from Evan Roberts back in the early 1900s in the Welsh revival. God used him greatly, but sometimes Evan would just stand up, say that, and then crawl up under the platform, and everybody would just start repenting and singing and whatever else. It was like a move of the Holy Spirit among the people of God. It wasn't a popularity contest. It wasn't a preacher that was in the spotlight. He would come and he says, here's what God's doing in our nation right now. It's an outpouring of his Spirit. Confess all known sin. Forsake anything doubtful in your life. Obey the Spirit promptly, immediately, and confess Christ publicly. If you want a fresh wind to blow in your life, you do those 4 things, and God just began to just sweep through a nation. And in just a few, I think it was 6 months, 100,000 people came to Christ because the church returned to the first love. I wish I had more time to talk about that stuff. Revival's my thing. Like, they were on the shores. They were teenagers now on your weekend. How do teenagers spend their weekends? Well, when revival hits an island, the Isle of Wales in the early 1900s, the teenagers would be heard on the beach singing, walking down the beach, holding hands, singing worship, like worshiping Jesus together. And many songs came out of the Welsh revival. One popular one, "Here is love, vast as the ocean." And it was like a return to, oh my God, the love of God is so great. And it was just a response to that. And they've returned in their first love. So today I want to talk about that second point, forsake anything doubtful. Hebrews 12, 1 and 2, if you got a Bible or phone, turn there real quick. Hebrews 12. It's a very familiar passage. He says, Paul, or the writer of Hebrews says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up, and let us run with endurance the race God has set before us. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith, the author and finisher. Because of the joy awaiting him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and now he's seated in the place of honor beside God's throne. Here's what I want you to hear today. Last week we talked about confessing all known sin, right? How many know that there are things that aren't inherently sinful that still don't belong in certain seasons of our lives? There are certain things that we carried in the last season, or might have even carried us through the last season of our lives, that aren't for this upcoming season with God. You've heard me use this analogy if you've been around here a while. I love space and all that kind of stuff. The Saturn V rocket that got us to the moon. It was it was in stages, right? The bottom stage, it had the power to get that thing off the launch pad and up to a certain altitude. And when it reached that altitude, you know what happened? All that gas was run out, all that fuel was run out of that rocket. And so they would jettison that part off, and then the next stage would take over and get it up to another level, and then that thing would jettison off, and then the other stage would get it to the moon. And that's how we got there. Had we just had one big rocket, what got us to a certain level now becomes dead weight. You see what I'm saying? So like we've got to see this in our lives too. Like there are certain things that were God things in the last season that now he's asking us to jettison. He's asking them, you don't need that right now because this is where I'm taking you. And I'm telling you, just like climbing a mountain, just like hiking Mount Everest, the farther you get up that mountain, the more you can't take with you. You got to go light. You got to go light because the air's different up there. There's certain things you can't wear in the presence of God. Moses approached the burning bush, and what did God say? Remove your sandals. What did he say to the priests? What did he require of their dress when they would walk into the holy place? They had to dress right. I'm not talking about suit and tie. I'm saying like there was a certain way that God wanted it done because you don't just stroll up into the presence of God. And so there's a thing that Jesus did on the cross that totally took away the barrier, and we can come boldly before the throne of grace, Hebrews says, to receive help and grace in time of need. But I'm telling you, there are seasons of our life, there are moments in our life that require the sandals to come off. They require the first stage of the rocket to fall off so that we can go further. Now, automatically when preachers start talking about this, like God taking you further to the next level, we often think about job promotions. We want to think about cars. We want to think about financial goals, all that stuff. I believe God blesses, but that ain't what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the main thing, and that's Jesus. Your destiny is Him. A lot of talk about destiny in the church these days. I'm all for that. I'm all for self-improvement. I'm all for doing things God's way, doing your finances God's way, walking God's way. And I'm telling you, it shows up in every part of your life. But if we let our destiny cloud over the one true destiny, that's Jesus Himself, we've missed the point altogether. And so that's what I'm talking about today is that destiny. He is our destiny. He's our destination. He's where we're headed. I'm preaching this morning. So, I didn't grow up on the coast. Some of you grew up on a boat. Let me see. You grew up on the water. I didn't, so I don't know a whole lot about that. Like, I'm probably that guy that you see on YouTube that backs the truck down the loading dock and then it's just gone. And it's like, you know. I don't know anything about that stuff. I get nervous, you know. And so this whole sails up thing has really got me studying a little bit of this stuff. I was talking to somebody this week that knew a lot more about sailing than I did, and they said, you know, I just got to see her. This wasn't even my message. You know, even when the wind's against you, if you know what you're doing, you can move forward. Somebody, that's a word. I love that, Stefan. But here's what I found out. There are two words. Flotsam, jetsam. Now, prior to a couple weeks ago, I thought those were the eels on Little Mermaid. I mean, they are. Now we've got her, boys. The boss is on over. Don't play like you don't know those words. Some of y'all still sing, poor unfortunate soul. Flotsam and jetsam are not just eels. They're seafaring terms. They describe two types of marine debris associated with vessels. Jetsam. It's a shortened version of the word jettison, to throw off, right? Jetsam describes debris that was deliberately thrown overboard by a crew of a ship in distress, most often to lighten the ship's load. So that's jetsam. We got to do something. Overboard. Throw it overboard. We can't continue to sail with this baggage on board, so we're going to throw it off, okay? The second term is flotsam. The word flotsam derived from the French word that means to float. To float. Flotsam is described as debris in the water that was not deliberately thrown overboard, but is as a result of a shipwreck or an accident. So jetsam is intentional casting off of extra weight. Flotsam is debris in the water because of shipwreck. How many know we want jetsam, not flotsam? Okay? So listen to what I'm saying. There are people, and I can be that person, and you can be that person. If we are unwilling to jettison off what is holding us back from what God has called us to, we will ultimately find ourselves floating around in flotsam. Many people, I've seen it over and over in ministry. I've been to the edge of it myself. Shipwreck. Because we're not willing to lay down what God has told us to lay down. We're not willing to lay aside every weight and the sin that so easily entangles us, ensnares us, weighs us down. I've seen marriages completely torn asunder because of that one thing. I've seen families completely destroyed because of that one thing. I've seen churches split up because of that thing. I've seen people miss a move of God because of this one thing. One of the gospel writers, and I'm not sure which one, I think maybe even more than one, but they'll tell this story about Jesus coming to the river and John baptizing him. And it says that there was a voice that came from heaven. When Jesus came out of the water, y'all know this, right? Holy Spirit comes down in the form of a dove. There's a voice that says, "This is my beloved Son with whom I'm well pleased. This is my boy, I'm proud of him." A voice happened. One of the gospel writers says, but not everybody heard the voice. To some it was a noise. To some it was thunder. But they didn't really perceive the words that were being said by the Father. They just noticed something different. And I believe just that passage reminding me, like, in my life, I can miss His voice if I've not prepared my heart. If I've not prepared, if I've not put my sails up, I can actually miss what He's doing. Do you know that most of the people that Jesus came to missed Him? Like, He came to Israel. He came to the people of God, and they rejected Him. Because maybe He didn't look like they thought He was going to look like. Maybe He wasn't doing what they thought He was going to do. And they were disappointed, and they were offended and distracted, and they just missed Him. And there He was, God in the flesh. The Word came flesh and made His dwelling among them. And John says, and we beheld His glory. But there were a whole lot that didn't. Man, John, if anybody would have beheld His glory, it was John, because he was always right here. He was always right beside Jesus. The Last Supper, he was the one leaning in. The other gospel writers record just a few verses in that time in the room with His disciples over that meal. And John's got 5 chapters in there. And they're mostly red words if you got that kind of Bible. He's leaning in. He didn't miss it. Every move of God throughout history has been missed by the people living right in the middle of it. Y'all okay with my history lessons? In the first Great Awakening, I'm about to knock the speaker off. In the first Great Awakening, Jonathan Edwards, you know what people said about that? Church people, like the religious people of the day, said, that can't be God, it's emotionalism. Folks getting crazy over there. People crying, falling in the floor crying over their sin. Like, somebody worked that up. That can't be God. And a great majority of the church missed God. Same thing in the Second Great Awakening, except a lot of the Second Great Awakening in our nation, it was not the laity, or no, I got that backwards. It wasn't the preachers and the church people that led that move of God. It was just normal people. And so a lot of people said, how can these backwoods people actually understand what God is doing? It can't be God. It's emotionalism. There's no intellectualism in this. It's just raw emotion. It can't be God. The Welsh revival, it was a problem of order and structure. We'd look at it, what God was doing. Oh, it can't be God because it's chaos. They didn't sing 3 hymns and do a message and then give an invitation. There's people singing on the 10th row back there, and then this one starts and gives a testimony like, that's chaos, so it can't be God. And they rejected it. They really did. And people who lived right in the middle of what God was doing in a special moment in history missed it completely. It's possible to miss what God is doing. In the Hebrides, the Isle of Lewis in the 1940s, it was theology. There was a whole denomination of churches on that island that said that can't be God because they don't believe right. And Jesus movement. I got some people in here who saw the Jesus movement in our nation. A bunch of hippies getting saved and coming in nice carpeted churches with pews with people who wore ties, and the church didn't know what to do with them. It was a cultural problem. And many people in the church missed that move of God because it didn't look like, you don't look like us. That offends me a little. Put some shoes on. Take your hat off. Cut your hair. You were just smoking pot 2 weeks ago. How can you be a Christian? You know what I'm saying? Like it was just offensive. And they missed God. The modern revivals, the last 20, 30 years, that's excess. That's excess. Where's the fruit in this? I don't see the fruit in this. It's possible to be in the middle of a move of God and miss it. I don't say that to cause fear. I just say that to say we must be aware and we must have our eyes fixed on one person. I don't fix my eyes on what's happening in your life. I don't have my eyes fixed on what I see that I don't understand. I don't have my eyes fixed on something that's offending me. What I have my eyes fixed on is Jesus, and he will never disappoint, and he is the main thing, and I don't care how he does what he wants to do. He can do it because he's him. It's Jesus. It's the point. So here's my little mini message in the message. How to miss a move of God. Number 1, distraction. Everybody say distraction. I can be unaware because I've got a lack of margin in my life, or I'm distracted by secondary issues. My theology, my politics, the way I see the world is not the way this person sees the world, and I'm so distracted by social media. I'm so distracted by everything in my life that I'm not seeing what he's doing. Distraction. Number 2, I can miss a move of God by offense. Offense. Revival is offensive because it confronts our sin. It confronts us. It confronts status quo. It confronts church as usual. It confronts everything about us, and it shakes everything in our lives until there's nothing left but him. I remember 2015. Now, I grew up in a very traditional, we came in and we did this, and this in service, and many of you grew up that way, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm thankful for my foundation. Got a foundation in His Word, boy. Like, that's all we did, man. It was just about the Word. But we sang a few hymns and we did the thing. And I found myself in 2015 in a, I don't know how to even describe it. I was in a worship service. And I was going, what is happening in this room? This is not what I'm used to. They had flags. And you know there's always good. Some of y'all know you came out of this background. Somebody showed up with that horn. Right in the middle. I'm like, what is happening? There's some, and that was the light stuff. Like that was the stuff that I could have gotten over. There was so many things to be offended about in that room. So many things. And I found myself doing that thing of like, that's not real. That's not authentic. Why do we have to do all this? Why has it got to be so busy and so... And I felt in that moment, I was like, okay, God, all right. I can't judge that. I don't know that person's heart. I don't know why you would do a flag. Like, I'm cool with that now. Like, y'all didn't see me this morning during rehearsal. I was running around with this. I just had it like a touchdown, like they do. Like the guy. And I remember being in that meeting, and I just said, Lord, I don't understand this stuff. I don't know. All I know is I've come this far, and I just want you and all you have for me. Nothing more, nothing less. And Jesus said, if you ask good Father for a fish, he won't give you a snake. If you ask him for bread, he's not going to give you a rock. And so I said, Lord, I'm open. Even when I don't understand, even when I'm offended, I'm not going to miss you over my offense. There's only one way to get around a fence, and you don't go around it, and you don't try to go over it intellectually. You go low, and you go under it. It's the only way. It's the only way. Distraction, offense, everybody say compromise. Compromise. Habits, extra weight. Jesus talked about the sower that went out sowing seed, and some seed fell on hard ground and all that stuff. You know that story. Go read that. But it says that the weeds came up and they choked out what was planted. The good news was choked out. I mean, we can let life choke out what God is saying and what God is doing in our life, and we allow the weeds to stay, and that's called compromise. And that's what I'm talking about today. And that's what God's calling us to today, is to lay aside the weight. To lay aside the things that, no, I don't have to confess that to God. It's not like sin, but it really doesn't have a place in this season in my life. Because it's going to choke out what he's doing. I don't know what this, I get this. I just want to release this. Don't carry what you're not willing to marry. I know that sounds cute, but think about that. We carry things thinking, it's no big deal. And before we know it, we're stuck. You better not get real serious with somebody you ain't willing to do the ring, you know what I'm saying? And there are things in our life, there are habits, there are things we say yes to that if we just do it off the cuff and are not thinking about future, we will find ourselves in a predicament. And I'm saying compromise gets us to that place of like, oh, this will be all right. It'll be all right to go ahead and just kind of do this. It won't last for long, and we'll just do this, and it's not a big deal. It's not sin, it's not sinful. There's nothing in the Bible about this. But it's distracting us from the main thing. So, worship team coming up. Or whoever's doing that. How are you doing this? Jason, bring those up for me. Just put them right over here. All right. This is big bag of rocks. Now, if you're from Savannah, or if you've been around Savannah for a little while, and you've been downtown, you'll see there's cobblestone walkways, right? Yeah. And a lot of the rocks are a little bit bigger than this, but they look a lot like them, so that's why I got them. Those stones down on River Street, not all of them, but many of them are the ballast stones from the ships who came to port in Savannah River a long, long time ago from England. And so the crops that were grown in the colonies here would be shipped back to England on these big ships. Well, there was a problem. In order to get here without a load that you're going to pick up, that ship just wasn't balanced. It didn't have a load. And so you had to find something to load it down with to get it here. And so what would happen is they would take stones from England, these ballast stones, and they would load the ship up with the stones. And they'd sail across the Atlantic, and when they'd come to port here in our city, in this colony, they would offload the ballast stones, and then they said, well, let's make a good road. So they made a road out of these stones. And then they would load the ship up with the cotton and with the indigo and with all the things that we grew here, and then they'd send it back to England. But the stones were to weigh the ship down for a purpose on the way over. And when they arrived here and they actually picked up what they were meant to carry back, these could not stay. And they had to lay them down. Because you can't carry what was meant for the last season and carry what God intends you to carry this season. And in a season where the wind is blowing, we have to lay aside every weight, or we won't be able to carry what He's intended us to carry. As a house, as families, as individuals. I think it was a couple years ago, my wife, come on up, Bethany. God spoke to her so clearly about what it means to lay aside the weight in our lives. And God set her free. And I can tell you from someone who lives with her, and I've said this before from the platform, like what she carried, let me put it like this. What she laid down allowed her to carry what she carries now. And she's literally a different person. And I want you to explain what God did in your life. And I want you to call us all into that same experience and obedience.
Okay. So like he said a few years ago, I had always been such a good girl. And my good works and my staying in line and my emphasis on doing what God wanted and what my parents wanted, it had carried me that far. It got me a long way. It kept me out of a lot of trouble growing up. But with it, there was a little bit of side effect that I added on as a flawed human being, and I had gotten to where I wore shame like a cloak. I mean, I was in a hood. I was just wrapped in shame. It affected every part of my life, and perfectionism. But it was just shame that I wore to kind of protect myself from anything bad that could happen, anybody not liking me, me not being successful, God being angry with me, you name it. And I went to a conference. I knew God wanted to do something major in my life. And at this conference, I waited. He was speaking to me. He was revealing truth. He was opening my eyes to what I was covered in. He was opening my eyes to how he actually felt and the truth of his word, and that he was not a huge fan of that shame that I was carrying around, that was never him. And so the whole conference, I was expecting some big firework breakthrough moment, like one of these anointed people at the conference to come to me and to just read my mail and tell me what God was saying and tell me what I was supposed to do. I was just waiting, somebody to speak over me. And that did happen to some people, but not to me. And so I was just like, okay, I've got all of this. I know what you're doing. I know that you don't like this shame in my life. What in the world do I do? And so at the very end, I'm just waiting for this big moment. They hand everybody a rock. And mine was a little rock. But they said, okay, what we want you to do, and this sounds kind of hokey, but like a youth camp thing or something. But what we want you to do is whatever God is dealing with you this week, whatever he's telling you to leave behind or just whatever, take a Sharpie, write it on there, and we got a pond out there in front of the church. Go throw it in that pond so you can't get it back. There's no way I could find it in that pond, and I'm not going to. So I was like, so nobody did this for me. It's like I had to agree with God about what he was saying to me personally, and I knew it was shame. I had to, there's nothing magic about writing a word on a rock and throwing it in some water. There's nothing, but it was in the agreement with God about what he was saying, and that step of faith that I had to take to confess it to him. Yes, this is what you're saying. And then the step of faith that I can't pick up my rock again and carry it somewhere to keep myself safe or to keep myself in line or to scoot back into those familiar ways of living. I had to toss it in their pond, and it was gone. It was at the bottom of that murky water. And so that's what we're going to do today. If God is already speaking to you about what it is that he wants you to cast off, come get a rock, grab a Sharpie, and write it on there. If you don't know yet, if it's still a little murky, take a rock, give him some time, and ask him directly, what is that thing? What is that weight that's holding me back? What is it that you want me to put on this rock? Because before then, I would have never thought it was shame. I would have thought it was something ugly, like anger or selfishness or something like that. But God had his own plans. He knew it was shame. So right now, if you want to do this, there's nothing magical, but agree with God about what he's saying and be brave enough, full of faith enough to take your rock and go find some water. If you want to have a rock tossing party this afternoon with some of your dwelling friends, do that. But find some water and get rid of it when you're ready to take that step and get rid of it for good, because that's what he's asking you.